Good morning, and thank you again for listening to us. This is Word of Faith Response, and we're so glad to be here with you today. Today I have David Guy with us. David is a teacher. He's taught at East Middle School for how many years now, David?
5 years.
5 years. And David actually came to Spindale from Scotland. So today he's going to share with you how somebody can come from Scotland all the way to little Spindale, and he's going to share his story, how God did miracles for him to bring him to this place. And he actually joined our church with his family when he was 10 years old, and then he was in our Christian school and graduated from the Word of Faith Christian School. Eventually went on to teach, and he's going to share about how that was coming from Scotland and growing up here and being in our Christian school. And so let's listen as David shares. Go ahead, David.
Good morning, Rutherford County, WCAB listeners. Thank you, Jim, for having me on this morning. My life story, I don't have like a sad background, so to speak, a bad upbringing. My parents really took care of me as I grew up. But like Mark said, I'm from Scotland. I came here when I was 10 years old. But growing up in Scotland, my mother was a school teacher. She was with us at home for a while, but she was a school teacher. And my dad was a welder, but as he went on in his career, he ended up working for the YMCA as a employment opportunity officer. So he would help people get jobs, basically, is what he did. So they had fairly good jobs before they came here. And we were involved in an evangelical church in the north of Scotland, kind of the first of its kind in our area. There was a lot of more traditional church, Presbyterian and Methodist, but an evangelical church was a newer thing. And so as my parents went to that church, they started my dad didn't really grow up in church. My mom did, but then when she went to college, she kind of got away from it a little bit. They started going to this church, and what drew my parents to that church was that people cared for each other, and that was the basis of that church. It was different, but people cared for each other. And we had some ministers that would come from time to time, and one of the people that came was Sam Whaley. And when Sam Whaley came, we went to a conference, and he was speaking. And when he came in, immediately my parents were drawn to the love of God in him. They could see the embodiment of what we read about in the Bible, of the love of Christ. They could see that in him. And the more they listened to him, that night when they went home, they turned to each other and almost simultaneously said, "I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm going there. I'm going to wherever he came from, that church." Now, if you look at a map of the world and try to find Spindale, it's not easy to find them. You have to find a very localized zone map. I guess you could find it on Google Maps if you wanted. But at that time, my parents didn't know where that was. But unbeknownst to us, my grandfather had worked in Michigan and retired to Weaverville, North Carolina. And so when I was 6 months old, my parents brought me over to visit, and we visited in Weaverville. I have a picture sitting on the sheriff's lap. But my mom went with my grandmother, and they went antique shopping, and they ended up at Antique Rose. Antiques in Rutherfordton. So when we came back here in 1992, God really put it in my parents' heart, to come here. So they talked to Sam and talked to Jane, and eventually we made our way here. They didn't know there was a Bible school, but they enrolled in the Bible school that was here at the time. And so they each independently knew in their hearts that God had put it in their hearts to come here. But then they came to me and my brother, and they asked us if we wanted to come. It wasn't just, "We're going, you're coming with us." They asked us if we wanted to come, and amazingly, for a 10-year-old boy at the time, I was like, yes, I want to go. I want to go to America. It was in my heart to do that. Now, I didn't really have a concept of what America was, but we made our way here, and there was a number of things I could talk about, but for the sake of time, I'll try and skim it down to to the bare minimum. But what I found when I came here as a 10-year-old boy and started going to the Christian school was there were people that really cared about how I was doing. They would take time to, how are you doing today? And it wasn't just a superficial question of, hey, how you doing? It was no, are you okay today? If I came in and I was a little grumpy, 10, 11, 12-year-old boy, grumpy, not really wanting to come to school, they'd say, are you okay today? What's wrong today? And they would share their life with me, not just the teachers that I had. It wasn't just they were my teacher. They were somebody that was there for me, that I could talk to, that I could confide in and ask questions that weren't necessarily just about the topic we were learning. So I saw from a young age people that really cared about students. They really cared about the people around them. And then as I got older and I was growing up in the church, I watched the ministers in the church, I watched my pastors take a personal interest in people. And, I'm not talking about they were micromanaging these people. I'm talking about they really cared how these people were doing. It wasn't just I'll preach a sermon, it was, how can I help you? What, if there was somebody that had a family member that passed away, what can we do to help you out around, we would get a group of us together and we would go and help them fix their yard or fix their house. And as a young boy, I grew up in that environment. Now, my dad, he was very involved with the elderly people within the church. He would go and visit them and just sit with them, spend time with them. And he kind of took me with him to do that. We would go visit the nursing homes. We would go visit people at their houses, help them just do simple things like taking the trash out for them or things that they physically couldn't do. And I started learning that, and that was something that was impressed upon me at a young age. So as I kept on going through the church, I started to want to do that myself, not just, my dad saying, hey, do you want to come with me? I was like, Dad, hey, I heard so-and-so needed this. Can we go help them? And so as I grew up I started, when I was a younger child, I really didn't like school. I was quite a belligerent little boy, actually, when it came to schoolwork. I had a teacher that I had a kind of a bad experience with, but I obliged them. I was equally as rebellious. But as I went through the Christian school here, I learned teachers that would stop and would cater my learning for me. Mm-hmm. Not just well, this is what the textbook said, so we're going to do the textbook. It was, if I had an interest in a particular area, they would take time to help me get the resources to learn about that thing. And so I learned that, and, not knowing in the future I would be a teacher, but I watched that and I paid attention to that. And so after I went through school, like I said, there's so many things I could talk about, but for the sake of time, I'll skim it down. As I went through school, it was a very small ratio of teacher to student. So there was a very close setting, very personable people, loving, caring, and it was because the focus of their life wasn't a career, it wasn't making money, because, as a school teacher, I know that you don't get into teaching to make money. That's not what your aim and your purpose is in doing it. But as I saw these people throughout my life, I saw people that cared about people. And the only way I can explain it is that those people loved God and they had the love of Jesus in their hearts. I was thinking when I was asked at the radio show, and I was reading a scripture with my daughter last night, and it was, show me your faith by your works. Because a lot of people say they love God. There's a lot of people, I'm a Christian. But show me your faith. And that's what I've seen all through my life. I've watched people that they showed their faith by what they did, by what they, their acts of kindness towards others, their answered prayers, their giving of themselves, their sacrifice, and the things like that. My parents gave up a lot to come here. And to get my brother and I in a place that was as nurturing, as caring as we were, and to stay here as an immigrant family going through the proper protocols of immigration was, at times it was a little tough. God gave us everything that we needed, but there were times where it was down to pennies to make ends meet. But every time God came through for us, and so as we went on, and I graduated from high school. I graduated from the Christian school, very proud alumni of the Christian school, class of 2000. And then I started, wondering what I was going to do next. I didn't really have I thought maybe I'm going to do electronic engineering. That was something I thought about, but I didn't really have a clear path on what exactly I was going to do. So, through a series of events, I met my wife, Amanda, and we were happily married. And once we were married, I got my green card. I started working here in the United States. And I was kind of going on a path of construction, maintenance type work, trades work, and very happy doing it. I really enjoyed doing it, still enjoy doing that type of work. But there was always something more, when I worked doing different trades, I always cared about the customers I was serving and always tried to have more than just have a nice day. Always tried to, ask them about themselves, learn about them, but always there was a little something missing. I didn't quite know what it was. And one day there was an announcement made in our church that there was going to be a missions trip going to Ghana, Africa. And if I can say one thing that changed my life, it was that trip. Because when you find what God wants you to do, there's nothing quite like it. I went on this trip. It was kind of, if you want to put it in terms, I guess it was kind of a medical trip. There was a lot of doctors and nurses and dentists, technicians and hygienists and stuff that went on the trip to help these people get medical records. They had no medical records. They had no medical care. Never been to a doctor, a nurse, anything. And so I kind of didn't really fit that mold. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't, I'd never been inclined to that type of work. But as I went, I just tried to help where I could. I'd always been somebody that tried to help where I could, wherever I could. And one day I woke up. I would wake up early in the morning because all these children that were living at this it was kind of like a dormitory they had where parents would send their children from all over Ghana, Africa to this school. And these children were staying there, and they would get up early in the morning, and they took such care of everything that they had. They washed their clothes, and they didn't have washing machines. They washed their clothes in 5-gallon buckets with scrub boards. And I watched these children that really cared about things that I took for granted, and they appreciated the slightest gesture of kindness towards them. And they would call you "sa." They had a little British accent, which I'm familiar with. "Sa, come, please." And I fell in love with those people. I loved them so much that I got on the phone with my wife, and I'm like, "Honey, you need to get a ticket and come over here because I don't know if I'm coming home." But what happened to me while I was there, one of the other people that went with us, he was kind of in a similar situation as me. He wasn't really medically inclined, but he found out that 2 of the classrooms, they had just come back from a recess, and 2 of the teachers didn't come back to school. So they were short a couple of teachers in the school, and they wasn't like they could just put out a job hunt and people show up for applications. It was, it's quite different over there. And so he said, why don't we just, tomorrow we can go sit in those classrooms and just at least supervise the children and help them where we can. And I was like, well, what grade? And he said, 5th grade. I said, well, I can handle 5th grade. That's pretty easy. I can do that. So I went in and I sat in that class, and it was 25, 27 students in that class. And I never taught in my life. Never taught English, never taught math, So here I am with the book, and I'm going to teach them math. And it's 5th grade math. It's not complicated, overly complicated. So I said, oh, I can do this. I can teach this. And so I was like, God help me. These are little people. These are not just, it's not a light matter to do this. So I started really, God help me, how do I teach somebody this? Because it's one thing to know something, and it's another thing to teach somebody else how to do it. And so I was like, God, how do I do this? And I've got 20-some students, and they're all looking at me, like I'm the one that knows this. And so I start teaching math, and then English was the next subject, and then it was a lunch break, and then it was French after lunch. Now, I don't speak French fluently. Don't claim to know French at all. But when I was a child, my mom had taught me 2 phrases, and those were the phrases that they were learning on that particular day. So it was kind of like, God does everything for you to get you in the place where you're supposed to be. So I taught them French class. And then after French class, it was science class. Now, unbeknownst to me, there was a friend that had gone with us, and his name was Mark Cornelius. He's been on here before. And he was kind of a mentor to me when I was in high school. He helped teach me in high school. He was very inclined towards science, and so he helped teach me. So I didn't know it, but on the classrooms there were these large glass windows, and they had them open for ventilation. And there was like a walkway outside, kind of like in a classroom it would be a hallway, but it was like a balcony that went the entire outside of the building. And so he was just walking and watching the classrooms and stuff. And so he saw me teaching this class, and he stopped by the window just to watch. And I was teaching science, which he had taught me some. And I was teaching them about the water cycle. And these are students that live not far from the equator, Ghanaians that had never even seen snow. So we're talking about the different forms of precipitation, and they know rain and hail, and some of them were familiar with frost, but nobody had ever seen snow. And so they started asking me questions like, what does it feel like? What does it taste like? And how do you explain snow to somebody that's maybe never even seen the inside of a freezer? And I tried my best. I was like, God help me, how do I do this? And afterwards, Mark stopped me, and he's like, you really have a gift, a talent for teaching students. You should, that was amazing. And that afternoon, I went down and I sat, and it was the heat of the day, and most people had gone to kind of lay down, and it was like a siesta type time. And I just started weeping and crying because I was overwhelmed with the expression of gratitude that everybody showed towards me while I was there. And I could tell it was a life-changing event for me. And I was crying. I was thinking back on everything that people had done for me. And all of a sudden, it was like like somebody physically sat down beside me and said, you're going to go back to North Carolina. You're going to get your teaching degree. And one day you're going to come back here and teach. And I was like, I literally looked to see if somebody was sitting beside me. That's how vivid and audible that was. And I know it was God speaking to me. And so that night, I was talking with some different people, and I was talking with my pastors, and they were like, I heard that you were teaching French today. I was like, I don't know French. And so we started discussing it, and I said, I'm really thinking that I might teach. This might be what I'm to do. I never taught before. My mom had been a teacher, but that wasn't something I had ever considered. So when I came back to the States, which I didn't really want to come, but I did, not because I don't like here, but because I loved it so much there. I came back to the States, and I started to get my degree. I took classes at Cleveland Community College. I still had to work. It wasn't like I could just quit working and go to school. So I did night classes and online classes with Cleveland Community College, which online classes can sometimes be pretty tough. Mm-hmm. And then I enrolled in ECU and took a distance learning course with ECU. Started doing at the same time I was doing my courses for ECU, I started working in Rutherford County Schools as a substitute teacher, and I loved it. I did a lot of work at RS Middle School. Worked with Robin Elliott there, 7th grade English. She's retired now, but anybody that went there in the past 12, 13, 14 years know Robin Elliott. Then I was a teacher's assistant at Cliffside Elementary for about 6 months or so. And then I started my student teaching, and I thought I was going to get to do it at RS Middle School because I had been there. I had been working with Robin Elliott. She said she wanted to be my teacher that I worked under. But the county decided that maybe I should go to East Rutherford Middle School instead, which now I know why. But at the time I was kind of a little disappointed because I loved it over at RS Middle. So I started working over there. I worked with Miss Kimberly Baker and Miss Jennifer Tate over there, science and English. And I really put my whole heart into teaching, and I loved every minute of my first class there. My student teaching kids were great. Just graduated, not this year, but last year. Went to their graduation. I loved it. Then I started teaching my first year at East Rutherford Middle School. I interviewed with Rutherford County Schools and got the job. Miss Oliver at East Rutherford Middle School hired me there. And I started working 7th grade English my first year. And I absolutely loved those kids. They're very special to me. That next year, I moved up with them to 8th grade, and instead of teaching English, I taught science and social studies to them, and still loved it. Same kids, moved up with them, and I loved teaching those students. They were so special to me. They'll always be special to me. And then the next few years, I continued to work on my teaching profession, received a lot of help, a lot of advice from teachers there at East Rutherford Middle School, and I loved the community. I felt like the people in that area just accepted me into the community. They would come in, stopping by, get to know me, and I really started taking what I had learned and giving it back to those students. The love of God that had been put in me all those years, the Christ-like example of laying down your life for other people, and that's why I'm the teacher I am today. And a lot of my students will know. I've got a student I actually ran into this morning, and their dad was telling me I write letters to my students every year, and he said how much it mattered to him, how much it cared to him. He knew I cared about his son and the difference it made to him, knowing that he had a teacher that really cared for him. And, I don't always consider myself the best of teachers. I know there are people that are much better educators than I am. But what matters to me is how my students develop. And can I give them the same thing that was given to me growing up? And I know where I learned that was in my church, in my Christian school, through my parents. And all that comes from the love that God has for each and every one of us. So that's a little bit of my story. There's so much more I could talk about, but that's really the gist of my experience and how I got into education.
And that's so powerful, David. What a great, wonderful blessing when you were sitting there in Africa. You didn't know what God had for you. You were just happy, just doing day to day whatever God had you do. And somehow God brought you to Africa to tell you that you're going to be teaching here in the Rutherford County Public School System. It's amazing. I've working out in the community as I do. I've run into middle school students who say, "I had Mr. Guy," and they said they really liked Mr. Guy. But it's obvious that the love of God that God has in your heart, they feel it. And like you said, when you're teaching, just being so aware of the students and how can I help them the best. And I was thinking about Jesus in John chapter 17. Jesus said that the love, he was praying to the Father, and he said, the love that I have, that Father, that you would allow them to have as well. I always think about that because I'm thinking the love of the Jesus, who is love. Everything about him is love, and he's praying and he's saying the love that I have, that all of these people would have this same love. And so when we have that love that Jesus has in our heart, it just pours out of us, and that's what Jesus said, they will know you by your love. Yeah. And I'm thinking about how much, every year you have all these students that come through there, and how God's put you there, God's called you there, and because you love these students, because Jesus put His love in your heart. What a blessing. And we have just a few minutes left. Since you grew up from the age of 10 in the Christian school, you're here now. You have two wonderful little girls.
Oh, yeah, I've got two little girls. I love them. I've got Ava, she's 4, and Mia, she's 7. Mia's in 3rd grade. Just a testament to the care and nurturing that she has. She's finishing 3rd grade, and she just turned 7.
And they're at the Christian school.
She's at the Christian school. My daughter Ava, she's in preschool at the Christian school. We have it's kind of a parent group that we do a little preschool there. But
if you could just share, we were talking last night about another aspect of growing up in the church. About you work out in the community. You may have heard this allegation that our church. I've heard this in the media. I've heard this from certain people, that our church somehow our pastors control everything we do. And we've had some programs here early on where we address that. Right. Our pastors tell us everything to do, what to wear, where to go, what we're going to do with our life, who we're going to marry, and so forth. And we've addressed those allegations, which are totally false. But you tell us, can you address that personally?
Okay. Well, one of the things about being told what to do. Okay, well, there's in the Bible, we're told how to live, but ultimately it comes down to our individual choices, whether we want to or not. There's nobody standing over us with a stick, gonna beat us, say you have to do this, or this is gonna happen to you. I mean, that God in heaven is watching you, and the Bible clearly tells us, be careful how you walk. And you want to live a godly life, and everything you want to do, you want to exemplify. Would Jesus live that way? Would Jesus say that? Would Jesus do that? Mm-hmm. So what we're trained in our church is to live a life that is deserving of the name of a Christian. So therefore, we don't go out and do things that are secular or things that are not godly to do. And it has, it's not a threat of, you're going to do this or else this is going to happen. Now, there are certain aspects, different religions that teach it that way, but under God's law, it's the law of liberty. You can do anything you want, but is it going to bring you closer to God? And that's what we were taught growing up and through the Christian school. And yes, obviously, when you're under your child and you're under your parents and you're under their care, they're going to guide you. And your pastors are there. The reason a pastor is a shepherd of their flock, they're going to say, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think this is a good thing to do. When I went and got my job recently, I'm moving to South Carolina next year, regretfully so.
Your job is taking you to South Carolina?
Yeah, I'm going to take a job. But I didn't go to my pastor and say, is it okay if I take this job? Mm-hmm. I went and said, pray with me. Help me hear if this is the right direction for my life. But I had already, at that point, interviewed for the job and basically was just one step from saying, yes, I'm taking this job. I just wanted confirmation from people in my life that know me, that have gone through my life. And it's that type of relationship, not a control like, you can't do this unless I approve it type thing. That's not that way at all.
And that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And we are out of time, but we appreciate you listeners listening to us again. This is Word of Faith Response. We've been sharing with you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. You can go to our website and learn more about these radio programs. We have all the radio programs on our website, which is wordoffaithfellowship.org. I hope you have a great day.